It's a real pleasure to have our guest today, Angela Berg, who, as Creel said, is the Global DEI Consulting Leader at Mercer. As Salim was mentioning, the women's market is a fantastic business opportunity for banks, but it cannot happen without gender diversity internally. We have actually found over the last few years at the Alliance that the internal side supports the external and vice versa. And so we have been developing a set of tools and know-how, and I've had many discussions actually with leaders across our membership about the interaction between those two forces. And we are delighted as a result to be launching today a whole range of services in the gender diversity and inclusion area that is in fact a parallel set of services to our women's markets. And with that, we have been partnering with Mercer, which is, amongst many accolades, one of the leading consulting companies that supports many corporations around the world to become more diverse and inclusive as workforces, including gender diversity. So it's my pleasure to introduce Angela, who is, as I mentioned, a partner, but also Global DEI Consulting Leader. Welcome, Angela.
Hi. Good morning, Inez. How are you?
Good. And I know it's very early on the West Coast of the United States, so thank you very much for joining us. So let's kick off, of course, with data, which we all love. In the 2020 When Women Thrive report, which includes responses from over 1,100 corporations around the world and over 120 financial services companies into gender diversity and inclusion. Can you tell us what it tells us really about the state of play in terms of women in the C-suite of financial services companies?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I'll say we were delighted at the number of participants in the survey. We got an excellent sampling in financial services. So the good news is, if you look at the numbers in aggregate, representation of women in financial services globally is actually higher than the global aggregate of the 1,200 participants in the survey. Financial services representation came in at 47% for women, and globally across all industries it was 40%. So that's good news. A caveat on that. In financial services, 58% of female representation was actually at the support level, so a bit lower level in the organization. At the C-suite level, we saw 21% representation of women in financial services, and comparison to all industries in aggregate, 23%. So about on par with the global average there. I think that as it relates to the C-suite, kind of the sobering fact in there is that when we take the data for, for financial services, in 10 years, representation in the C-suite will only achieve 38 to 40%. So there's still much work to be done if we continue on the current trajectory.
Wow, that is sobering. I wanted to ask, therefore, in your own experience, as well as in Mercer's, what do you think has been kind of the key levers to get more women into that C-suite position?
Yeah, first I'll say there are so many excellent programs, and the gentleman from Bangladesh who just spoke before us and has talked about one of those programs that can really help accelerate women, and they play a critical role. I think that longer term we should be thinking about how can we help all women have an experience that will help all women in the workplace thrive, because having that really rich, robust pipeline of female talent at all levels is ultimately what's going to make getting women into the C-suite in financial services sort of the everyday thing, just the way it operates. But in the meantime, in addition to kind of those programs that help boost participation, two things I'd like to focus on. One is networks. And when we, in our research, our consulting, we often hear and see data that shows that women have very different kinds of networks than men within organizations. And it's having those network connections within the firm, within the company, that helps women get more opportunities, more visibility, get on succession plans. So organizations who can really help expand women's networks, whether their personal network, that is, whether it's giving them a particular assignment or whatever the case may be, critical. I'd say the other one is looking at accelerator roles within your organization. What are those key critical experiences that lead to leadership, and ensuring that women have equal representation and opportunity to participate in those roles? Because again, if they don't have the broad network within the organization, they may not have equal opportunities to get into those critical roles.
Yeah, that is so interesting. It's almost like I don't know how it happens, but it seems that guys know that roadmap. They know that there's certain roles that need to get ahead, and yet women seem to be a bit blindsided by that. It's a
Yeah,
curious. Um,
it is. It's true though.
It's also true, actually, from our members that a lot of the ones that have been really successful have large women's networks, and it's because of the involvement in those networks actually that they became more interested in the women's market. So that's where we see this kind of reinforcement of the internal with the external, and vice versa. In the last, you know, there has been some argument that the low hanging fruit, as it were, has been picked in terms of gender D&I, and now we really have to kind of dig deeper and do more of, let's say, take a more comprehensive approach. And in some jurisdictions, in fact, there is some regulations coming forth around quotas. For instance, as you know, the European Union has a mandate, or has required public companies to reach 30% female representation of the board. What is your view, and the view of Mercer on the low hanging fruit question, and also on the quota question?
Sure, great question. So, as it relates to low hanging fruit, I would say there's still in the financial services industry a lot of low hanging fruit to be picked. So, I'll share some of our data from the When Women Thrive survey along those lines. And I'm going to refer to my notes to make sure I get it right. So, 81% of the global participants in the When Women Thrive survey, financial services, said the advancement of women in our organization, gender equality is a top priority for leadership. However, only 39% actually have a documented strategy around that. So a bit of a say-do gap there. I'd say having a documented strategy is low-hanging fruit, and there's clearly a lot of opportunities for companies to do that. The other area is around pay equity. It's a huge driver in the retention of women and helping them thrive within an organization. We saw a huge surge in organizations globally across all industries who are doing pay equity, but in financial services, only 63% of organizations are using the most robust statistical methods to do pay equity. So there's still room in pay equity on this kind of foundational activity. The other area that I think is low-hanging fruit that can really drive progress is ensuring that women, as I mentioned earlier, are in those accelerator roles. The vast majority, 80% of financial services respondents in our survey said women are equally participating in those roles. They have equal access to them. But when we asked, are you tracking it? Is there equality between men and women in those roles? The answers were generally 50% or lower. So in other words, women are not being equally represented in those key accelerator roles. So those are just a few examples of low-hanging fruit that pretty foundational to driving gender equality and equality of opportunity, experience, and pay that financial service organizations are not taking advantage of at this time.
That
And
is so
quotas, you asked about
super.
quotas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly on quotas. Yeah, they solve representation. They bring women into the organization. The question that we would pose back: are the women thriving? Are the women staying? What experience are they having once they get into the organization? We sometimes see in the data kind of a revolving door that this diverse talent's being brought in, but the hardwiring of the organization, programs, policies, processes don't really support them to be successful there. So quotas can work, but there's additional work that needs to be done to ensure that you retain those women and develop and promote them.
Wow, so interesting. Okay, so slide please. We've just produced a how-to guide with the support of Mercer, which maps out the gender D&I journey with lots of tools and interactivity and so on. And this has been an incredibly powerful collaboration between yourselves and ourselves, and it includes case studies from over 15 members. So we've basically developed a whole new community of D&I professionals within our network. It's divided into three sections: plan and prepare, which is all around the diagnostic and aligning the organization, and then moves over to taking actions in the key areas, such as almost like the elusive creation of an inclusive culture, if you like, an inclusive employee value proposition, recruiting in fair and inclusive ways, and building and developing a talent pipeline, and then kind of moves on to the important measurement and refining of the strategy. So that is being published today. It's available to our members in the Vault section of our website, and we encourage you all to use it. And we would really enjoy getting some feedback from you on that. Can you tell us, Angela, why you think that's actually a useful tool for financial services companies?
Sure. Well, Inez, I was actually thinking about the fact I think it's a unique tool in any industry. It's an extraordinary document, and I commend the amazing work that your team did to put all of this together. It's going back to the fact that only 39% of financial services organizations globally have a strategy. This is your roadmap to getting the strategy. It provides all of the end-to-end holistic guidance to be able to really very holistically address the kinds of actions and considerations that would be powerful. And Mercer's delighted that we had an opportunity to have a number of our global experts in DEI contribute to it, including around some of the critical data analytics. So again, we're very excited and encourage everyone to take a look at it. I'm sure you'll find, whether you're just starting on your DEI journey around gender equality or along the way, excellent advice and guidance.
Thank you. That's really very generous of Mercer, and we also thank CDC for financially supporting the creation of that guide. Now let's get to the burning question of the moment, which is the pandemic. And let me ask you your perspective on the future of gender D&I, the risks and the opportunities that COVID-19 is presenting the world of work.
Yeah, there's obviously impact, and at least in the United States, there's been a lot of articles and discussion around this is setting women and gender equality in the workplace 10 years back and impacting wages. There's one part that I'd like to focus in on because we've got some research data points around it. In the fall of 2019, when we launched the One Women Thrive research, we really wanted to explore flexible work because we knew that would be an important enabler for women in the workforce to have that additional flexibility. And as you think about a younger millennial Gen Z generation coming into the workforce, might be important for attraction and retention there as well. What we learned, in short, is there's a big say-do gap, and that is that organizations say they support it. They might even provide programs to support it, but they also, on the other hand, admit that individuals who take advantage of it aren't viewed as being as valued as those who are sitting in their chair every day in the office. So fast forward to COVID, where we've had this, unprecedented global experiment application of flexible work. And women, as time goes on, as the pandemic goes on, will continue to be at home working, whether it's for health reasons, their children, impact from, another spouse, whatever the case may be. And while employers are saying we support that, are their attitudes and behaviors and the way they evaluate women have they actually changed? Are they still as undervalued as what we saw back in the research in the fall? I think while policies and programs can change pretty rapidly, there's kind of this chilling reality that maybe and probably the attitudes towards working at home haven't changed. I think that presents a tremendous challenge for women, and that organizations need to take a deep look inside to really say, this is kind of our new normal, at least for now, and we need to really ensure that we are supporting women who are working from home for an extended period.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I think as a network, we've been hosting webinars on a weekly basis with our members in response to COVID-19, and the number one priority is first their employees, then obviously the customers, and third their communities. And on the employee front, we've actually seen an awful lot of focus on mental health and well-being. And just on Tuesday, AXA, which is another member of ours, it's the largest insurance company in the world, produced a report on from 8 countries with 8,000 women on the mental load of the pandemic, and the kind of expansive, because we take on the responsibility for elderly parents generally, our own kids certainly, and our spouses. There's a lot of weight placed on our shoulders, and then when you combine that, I know in our team, having kids at home and working is challenging. So, do you think it's going to set the clock back, or what kind of corrective measures? Because we have a lot of leaders on this phone. What kind of corrective measures could they take now to ensure that we keep on track with the gender diversity and inclusion agenda?
Yeah, I think the mental health piece is obviously so critical in ensuring that women and all employees have access to the right resources to support them. I guess the
Mm-hmm.
challenge I would put out there is train your managers. We know that
Mm-hmm.
probably in financial services, around 50% of organizations do engage managers and frontline supervisors in implementing and managing DEI efforts, but another 50% don't. So I would say think about the kinds of competencies and skills, tools that managers and supervisors need to effectively engage and promote and help their employees who are working from home be successful. It's a different set of competencies and behaviors than what we would experience if we were all in the office. And I think that that's one of the key pieces, because that's who employees engage with on a day-to-day basis, is their manager, their supervisor. So ensure that those individuals understand fully the strains of women's load working from home, and are taking that into account when giving them assignments, their roles, as well as expectations and performance reviews.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And just one final question. In terms of getting the women actually into the top, the C-suite, we're still a bit stuck, I think, in at least the data shows we're a bit stuck in the traditional roles. Like, we'll get the HR person in there, we'll get the legal counsel, and you're getting into those accelerator roles. But there is a weakness 4 or 5 layers down in the financial services companies, where, with retraction potentially in the sector, we've heard from some members that it's the relatively highly paid women that might be the first in the firing line. What is your sense of that? Have we seen it yet, or is it coming down the pipe?
Yeah, we don't have the data yet to be able to say what the impact of that looks like. I will say that if we look down from the C-suite in our data on financial services, the pipeline is adequate. It's actually really interesting that financial services appears to be doing a good job promoting their women through the organization and retaining them, and at the same rate as men, and actually a little bit lighter on the hiring side. So it's kind of an interesting situation there. I would say that it is an area of concern, and that preserving that pipeline is going to be really critical as this moves on. Clearly, financial services has done a good job of developing that pipeline based on the data that we see. And as I think it is a big threat and a concern that it could put the C-suite progression behind a bit if women in that are losing their jobs. We just haven't.
Mm-hmm.
We'll do another tranche of data collection and see what that looks like.
Sure. Well, look, Angela, it's really been a pleasure. We thank very much, Mercer, very much for your generous support. We thank also for living this day in, day out, and being, we have some of the best in class in the world, actually, among our membership in terms of D&I. So we're very grateful to them for contributing their know-how to this agenda. And thank you so much, Angela. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure, and we're excited about the unveiling of the guide today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.